What are some quick and easy card making ideas you can make again and again without getting bored? Today we're sharing 5 card template ideas that are easy to recreate and make your own when you want to make lots of different quick cards. All over background with sentiment focus. A simple ink blended background with a large sentiment focus is the perfect go-to card template when you're in a pinch. Use your favourite background stencil and a nice big sentiment to complete your card.
And this is the one we're going to be using today. So I put it into my stamp wheel with the sticky mat, and then we are going to ink blend a rainbow of color on top of this. So I'm going to be using lots of luscious inks, of course, and the little ink blending tools. So we're going to start with Citrus Burst. And this is all going to be in real time, so you can actually see like how long it takes me to do all of the ink blending. And I will be using a different blending tool for every color because I am a little bit extra like that. I like having one for each color so that I don't get color contamination. But now we're gonna take our little brush and we're gonna put it directly to our stencil and our paper here. And I've kind of, you might notice this a little bit further on, I kind of started doing a straight line here, and then with my next color, which is going to be Amber Blaze, I have put all of the ink colors on the screen as well in case you want to write them down. Now here, for some reason, I don't know, I kind of decided to go like in a bit of a rainbow-esque shape and like that kind of arch. And then kind of halfway through, I abandoned that idea. I don't know. I can't explain these things. Things just happen sometimes. But what I should have done here, I should have carried on with the Amber Blaze all the way down to the bottom of that kind of row. But instead I went with the Crimson to add that kind of reddish bit, and we've kind of gone a little bit more archy here again. But yeah, it's not going to be long until we kind of go in straight lines again. But it's, you know, just one of those things. Either do as I say or do as I do and end up with very different results. That is entirely up to you. Now, you might see that I will go back and forth between some of the colors here to kind of make sure that I get a nice color. But here first, now, we're gonna take this is an old kitchen towel, and we're going to very gently rub off that crimson ink before we add our puffy heart ink. Because we want, you know, the colors to be the colors that we actually want them to be, not just kind of randomly mixing colors to make a mixture between crimson and puffy heart. So we want each color to stand out on their own. And here you can still see that it's a little bit archy, but all of a sudden I'm kind of going a little bit straighter as well. So yes, not quite sure what's going on here, but you know. Anyway, so now we're going to move on to Hydrangea, and we're going to, again, load up our brush. We are going to tap off a little bit of the excess. Now, the reason I do this, especially when I have a new tool, is also to help spread the ink evenly onto the bristles, because I find that it gives me much smoother results. So I don't get those like blobs of ink in places where I don't want them, basically. So it's more to, it's not just about sort of making a mess, although, you know, that happens as well. But it's more about kind of, you know, prepping the brush, prepping the ink, and, you know, just getting the best results. And then also when you do need just a touch of ink, especially when you do like pastel ink blending, you have, instead of going to a super saturated ink pad, you can take a little bit of ink from the lid instead. It works a treat, I tell you. Now we're going to go in with our favorite blue, my favorite blue, Dusk. I love this blue. It is such a gorgeous blue. Love it. Cannot say enough good things about it. But we're going to put this away, and we're going to finish off with our last color, which is going to be Firefly. And we're going to wipe off a little bit of that Dusk again, because the Firefly is quite light, so we don't want any color contamination. No. And again, you will see me here and there kind of going back and forth with the colors to kind of get that nice smooth color blend, like as they're going into each other as well. Now I know that not everyone works the way I do, because I am a little bit of a lunatic. I am not going to lie. I am a little bit of a crafting lunatic. Now, if you want to have just a smallish amount of blending brushes, you know, you can always just clean them off in between. And if you keep one for like your darker color families and one for your lighters, you know, you'll be good with that. You don't have to be as extra as I am. It will probably save you a pretty penny as well, not gonna lie. But now we are almost finished here. So you can see it doesn't take a huge amount of time. And when you really focus on it as well, it's gonna take less than, I mean, we're something like 5 minutes into the video and we have a beautiful background, but you can kind of see like where I started with the arching and then kind of went to the straight lines, but never mind. It is pretty, it's colorful, and we are going to sparkle this up. Now, we are actually going to be using some sentiments from the Sulfur Cosmo stamp set. So this is a product suite that comes with a stamp set, coordinating die cuts, and also the layering stencils. So I have stamped these up with permanent black ink, and then I've used the coordinating die cuts to cut them out. But of course, you know, we must use a little bit of foam tape to pop these up, because otherwise it would be, even with the texture that we're going to add with our bling later, it would be quite flat. And I do love me some foam tape. I cannot lie about this either. So if you haven't gotten onto the foam tape wagon, I firmly encourage you to get on board and take your card making to the next level. Like literally, with, you know, we're going to pop them up and like create layers and dimension. It is such an easy and fun way to add some texture and amazing, you know, just layers. It just brings your card to life. It's such a good product. Now, I would like to extend a crafting Nobel Prize. I can do that because I'm Swedish, to whoever came up with foam tape, because it is seriously one of the best adhesive inventions ever. It really is. So we are going to finish off here with our foam tape, and we're going to pop these beautiful sentiments on here, and then we're going to take our bling-a-ling and we're going to add a little bit of a luscious texture. Now, it would be pretty just as it is. And if you're sending this, if you need to send a card like this, you know, you can skip the foam tape and just keep it quite flat, because flatter cards are better for the mail for sure. Now, we're going to be using lots of black onyx gem sparkles, and we're going to be using the smallest size to pop them all in like the middle of these like little mini mandalas, I guess you could say there, or bursts, sparkles. I mean, you can either say they are like snowflakes. Oh, snowflakes, that could work well for Christmas actually. Okay, side thought there. Yeah, whatever they are, mandalas, snowflakes, fireworks, sparkles, crystals, whatever. They are so pretty, but we're going to make them even prettier, and we are going to add these bling-a-lings to the middle of them. Now, some of these were just slightly like difficult to add the gems to because of the way I place the sentiments, but I do think it's a better idea to place your sentiments first and then add your bling. So you add your bling as the last thing, so that you don't have any issues where you need to kind of either like pull something off, or, you know, it's just trust me on this one, leave the bling for last for sure. But now our bling is done. We are just going to actually trim this down a tiny bit, because I do like it when your panel, or the panel, has that kind of like little white frame around it when you put it onto a card base. It's such a like tiny thing to do, but it just adds a little something like, plus it's another layer, so more texture, yay! Okay. I probably need to calm down a little bit, but I do get very excited about these like little tips and tricks and stuff, you know. So now we have finished trimming, and we are going to just pop this baby upside down, add some foam tape, or no, not foam tape. Although you could, because that would look really cool as well. But then it would definitely be a hand deliver kind of card and not a mailing card. Now, I don't actually have the Altenew tape rollers, but I will be adding some of those as well to my ever expanding shopping list. So here we're just going to add a little bit around all of the sides and a little bit in the middle, just for safety. And then we're going to be wild rebels here. We are going to just eye it. We are just going to pop this down onto the card base and hope for the best. Usually I do add a little bit of liquid glue on top of the foam tape, or sorry, I keep saying foam tape, the tape runner, just to make sure that I do get it, you know, straight. But I think I managed quite well today.
Tag focal point. A unique card look, but a great easy go-to when you're facing crafter's block. Simply decorate a tag and stick it to your card base for a beautiful, clean and simple look.
I've taken a piece of vellum translucent paper and I'm placing this in the stamp wheel so that I can stamp my butterfly on top. So just popping that down in the corner there. It's going to stick to the sticky mat, and then I can bring in the butterfly. I just think it's absolutely beautiful. There are coordinating stencils if you wanted to colour it in, and I'm going to show a little peek of that at the end of the video. But for now, I'm placing it down onto the vellum. I can then bring it in the top flip plate of the stamp wheel, pop that down and pick up that stamp. I can then flip it over and I can ink up the image using embossing ink. This is a clear sticky ink so that when I add the embossing powder on top, it's going to stick to it. So I'm just inking up that image really well. It is quite detailed, so just making sure I cover all of the areas. And then I forgot to prep my vellum, so I'm just bringing in an anti-static powder tool, and then I'm going to remove the excess powder with a brush. This helps to prevent any static cling so that hopefully the embossing powder will only stick to the ink. I can then flip over that top flip plate, pop that in place and then stamp the image down onto the vellum. So just lightly pressing that down, and then I can flip up the plate. And then I've got my butterfly stamped onto the vellum. I can then apply some pure white crisp embossing powder, and I do like to do this a few times, tap off the excess just to make sure that I get really nice coverage of that powder. I'm then going to heat set it using my heat tool. If you've never embossed on vellum before, do be careful because it does warp quite easily. It does heat up very quickly. So as you can see here, I'm kind of going in sections, moving the heat gun away so that I'm not going to accidentally overheat that vellum. Also, I don't want to overheat the powder, but the vellum will warp if it has too much heat on it. So I'm now just kind of flicking it in the air to cool it down. Vellum does cool down a lot quicker than cardstock, and then I can remove any excess powder with a cloth. And then I had just a couple of little specks of embossing powder where I didn't want it, so I'm just using a craft knife there just to carefully remove that embossing. And if I just use the very tip of that knife, it comes off quite easily. I'm then taking the coordinating die from the Flutter and Bloom die set. I can place that over the top of the image and then hold it down with some low tack tape. When I'm doing any die cutting with vellum, I do like to die cut on top of a scrap piece of paper. This just helps to not only get a clean cut with the vellum, but also make sure that I don't get any marks on the back of the vellum from the cutting plates. So I've got my lovely butterfly there. Vellum does warp quite easily just with kind of moisture of your hands. So what I'm going to do is just place something heavy over the top while I work on the rest of the card. For the background, I want to have my butterfly on a tag. So I've cut one of the larger tags from the Terrific Tags die set from Classic Crest £110 Solar White cardstock. I do want my tag to be a little bit shorter in height, so I'm bringing back the die and I'm going to place it on top and kind of figure out here how short I want that tag to be. So I'm bringing it in the stamp set to make sure that I've got enough space around the butterfly, but that there's not too much. So just just lifting that up a little bit, making sure that that's in place, and then I can hold that down with some low tack tape. And when I run this through my die cutting machine, it's going to cut the tag to be shorter. I could just cut it down with a guillotine or a paper trimmer, but I really love how dies just kind of round the edges a little bit, and I think it finishes it off nicely. And I'm not having to do any partial die cutting or anything, because nothing's sort of inside of that shape of that die that's going to cut again. I've placed that down on a sticky mat, and I'm going to add some ink blending on top with the new Northern Shore fresh dye ink collection. So I've got the little cubes here. I absolutely love these colours. I'm glad that they've brought them out in the fresh dye ink collection now. Such pretty blue shades. I'm not using the lightest shade today because it's going to get completely covered up otherwise, but I am using the next lightest, although to be honest a lot of this will get covered up as well. This is the Icy Water, and I'm using a small blending brush, and I'm just going to go over the entire tag with this colour. I'm not too concerned if it's splotchy or anything like that, because like I say, this colour is pretty much going to get completely covered up, apart from just right in the very centre. I do like to dab off the excess ink from the brush. This does generally give me a smoother blend, but halfway through this I realised that it's going to get covered up, so I wasn't too concerned. I'm now taking the second darkest shade, which is Winter Lake, and I'm using the same blending brush, and I'm just trying to sort of focus this colour around the outside edges and leave kind of like a lighter area in the centre, which is going to help to kind of make it look a little bit like the butterflies glowing sort of from behind. I'm then taking this same colour, but I'm using a mini blending brush this time and going around the kind of very outer edges, I suppose, here. And not only is this going to just be darker because I'm adding another layer of ink, but because I'm using the mini blending brush, the bristles are a lot denser, so it just automatically adds a darker saturation of colour on top. So I'm just going around the edges here, and you can see that as I add this darker colour, that sort of lighter glow in the middle just kind of gets even brighter. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the darkest shade. I am bringing in the small blending brush here. I thought that it might blend it out a little bit more. It did absolutely nothing whatsoever, but in my head I thought that it did something. So now I can go in with the darkest shade, which is the Arctic Mountain, and again just focus this colour very much on the outside edges. I would often add maybe like a black on top, but I thought that this was dark enough that I didn't need the black as well. So just going around those outside edges there, and you can see that I've got a really nice sort of highlight in the centre. I do want to add a little bit of splatter on top, so I'm adding a bit of water here onto a non-stick craft sheet, just adding 2 pools of water there. And then I can bring in the Artist Squash. This is the titanium white to start with. And I can just add a small amount of that onto the craft sheet. These bottles, or tubes I should say, are going to last me absolutely years because I only use a tiny bit at a time, but I don't want to waste too much of it, even though I've got loads. I can then just do the exact same thing with the carbon black. I'm then taking a watercolour brush. This is a really tiny brush. This is a size 2, and for the black I'm actually using a size 1 because I don't want to have these splatters too big. I want them to be quite small, kind of look a little bit like sparkle in the air, sort of around the butterfly. And again, that's just going to help it glow as well. So just tapping that brush to splatter on the paint onto the tag, and I'm focusing most of the splatters sort of around the outside edges. Not only will these show up the most because they are on the darker areas, but because the butterfly is going to be in the centre, most of the centre splatters are going to be covered up anyway. And then I can do the same thing for the black, and again focus these mainly towards the outside edges where it's darker. But I thought it was quite nice having the combination of the black and the white. And then I am going to set that aside to dry. I'm just going to try and carefully lift this up here for you to see it a little bit better, trying not to get my fingers in that paint. So I think that looks really pretty. Once that's dry, the inks do kind of fade a little bit and do blend out a little bit more as well. I've then got the silky lilac metallic thread, and I folded that in half, and now I'm folding it in half again. I want to do a double bow. Because this thread is quite thin, I think that it gives a really nice impact if you use it in kind of like a double bow rather than a single bow. So I'm just threading that through and securing that at the front. I can then take the pieces and then tie those into a bow. So I've got 2 strands on either side. And this thread is a little bit on the slippery side, so I'm just taking my time here to tie that bow. And it does get a little bit fiddly because of all of the strands of thread, but like I say, I think it looks really pretty, and I think it makes a bigger impact with that double bow. So just trying to get the bow how I want it to be, and then I can cut off the tails using some scissors. And when I'm doing a double bow, I do often like to cut the tails sort of slightly different on each one, so one being slightly shorter and one being slightly longer. I'm then adding some instant dimension foam tape onto the back of the tag, so just cutting strips of that and popping that on the back, and then I can remove the backings off of that foam tape. I'm then adhering it down onto an A2 size white card base, so that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. So just hovering that in place, and then I can press that down. I have then heat embossed a sentiment from the Flutter and Bloom stamp set. Just did the exact same thing like I did with the butterfly, but onto black cardstock instead, and cut that down into a strip. I can then add some foam tape onto the back of that, and then using the grid lines on my mat, I'm going to try and line up this sentiment as straight as possible on the top of the butterfly. So I'm trying to sort of line the butterfly up with the grid lines, and then I can line the sentiment up with the grid lines as well. And now I've got a place to add adhesive on the back so that it's not going to show through the vellum. I'm using glue tape here, and I'm just adding as much as possible on that kind of strip there behind where the sentiment is. In hindsight, I wish that I had just cut a piece of double-sided tape down, but I didn't think of that at the time, so I might try and go back and remove the butterfly really carefully and add some double-sided tape behind there. I think that that would hold a little bit more, hold a little bit better, I should say. But as I am doing it at the moment, I'm just using a T-square ruler to try and line that up straight. And then I'm going in with my tweezers, and I'm kind of poking them behind where the sentiment strip is to try and press that glue down as best as possible. And then I didn't completely get a really lovely impression with the embossing powder for the sentiment. So I'm going in with a white gel pen just to cover any gaps that I might have. And then I'm just going to lift up the wings of the butterfly. I think it just looks really nice, just having it a little bit more dimensional. And so that is the card finished for today. I really love how that butterfly kind of glows from behind. I think it's very pretty. But I did want to just share with you my thought process on the card. I had originally planned on stamping the butterfly and then ink blending it with the same colours of ink that I used for the background with the stencils, and I do really like how it would look like this, but I felt like the butterfly just didn't glow enough, and I do really like how it glows on the vellum. But I think I'm going to do the card on the right hand side with the dark background and the white tag, and I think that that pops just a little bit more.
Masking to create a panel. Texture, colour, depth, this card has it all, and it's actually pretty easy to recreate, especially with the amazing Raised Sentiments 3D embossing folder, which can add all of the sentiments in one go. The fun masked sentiments panel makes your cards look more dramatic and requires less ink blending than if you inked up an entire card. First up, I have a panel here. This is 4¼ by 5½, and I'm just going to mask off all of the edges. This is around about 3¼ inch that I'm masking off all of the sides using some of the satin masking tape from Altenew. So once I have that down, I'm then going to add in a ink blended background. I'm using some fabulous inks on this one. So the inks I'm using are rose quartz for the pink shade. For the yellowy orange shade that we have there, I'm going to be using the golden honeycomb. I'm then going to move into a green, which is the aloe vera, then some of my favourite mountain mist, then water hyacinth and some wisteria for the purple at the bottom. So I'm using mini blending tools for this, but you could use a larger one if you find that that works best for you. Once I'm happy with my background, I'm then going to remove the masking tape. Remember to remove this as flat as you can to kind of stop the tearing. Once that's done, I'm going to line that up in my 3D embossing folder. I'm trying to line this up where I want the "You Are the Best" sentiment on my card. Once that's done, I'm going to run that through my machine and you can see just how fabulously this has embossed. To make sure that those words do stand out a little bit more on the background, I'm just going to take some of the cloud white ink. I'm just going to rub that gently over the top of the embossed image, and you can see just how that makes the words pop off the background. For a little bit of interest, I'm going to add in some flowers, and these are from the Mini Delight Live in the Moment. I just love how small this little flower is, and I'm going to emboss this onto some vellum. To do this, once I have my vellum piece, I'm going to add a little bit of anti-static powder down. I do use some talcum powder to do this. I'm then going to stamp my image twice using some embossing ink from Altenew, cover over the top with some pure white embossing powder, and then heat set. This image doesn't have a die, so I am going to fussy cut around these. For this sentiment, I'm going to take a piece of black cardstock. I'm going to line that up with the sentiment that I want on the 3D embossing folder and then run that through my die cutting machine. Once that's done, I can trim this to size. And also, to make that sentiment pop a little bit, I am going to use the cloud white ink again and just rub that over the sentiment. I'm then going to add the flowers behind my little sentiment strip. And then I'm going to add a little bit more adhesive before adding this down into place onto my card panel. Flowers in the center. An inky card with no ink blending required. Therese's technique here is a brilliant way to accomplish a beautiful, typical central flower look with limited effort. You will love the unique variation you get with each card this way.
So I thought I'd share both techniques with you here today. Both cards are going to be using ink swiping, which is literally exactly what it sounds like. I'm just using the ink pads and swiping them direct onto the 80-pound Nina cardstock. I did match a couple of the inks here. I wanted some pale inks, and these are actually the crisp dye inks, and I'm really noticing the difference doing the ink swiping with this style of ink. The vibrancy of the new ink pads from Altenew, I didn't realize before just how much of a difference that it makes. I know admittedly my other ink pads are older, but I've never felt like I needed to re-ink them for just typical stamping. Alright, so I have the Magnolia Crafter flower here, and I just tried not to think too much or too hard about it. I just literally cut all the layers of the flowers out, making sure to leave some of the white space for some highlights on my project. I did the same with the leaves. Now I did swipe the dark blue, which is called the Easy Breezy, but I didn't end up using that. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it, so I just stuck with the pale blue-green and the green colour. To adhere my flower together, I used some liquid glue, but you can use whatever you prefer. You could even actually use some double-sided adhesive tape on the back of your die cuts, but I like being able to sort of move things around a little bit if I needed to. And I do like the way that the swipes of ink really can give you a variation on the petals of these flowers and on the leaves. And as I said before, I didn't use all the layers on the leaves, I just used 2. Now I've got a piece of pale grey cardstock here. I've stamped a sentiment, which is from the Silk Art stamp set, and I've popped up a panel on the front of my card. I kept this card very clean and simple. I think that the swiped ink gives it a real kind of modern look, so I didn't want to, jazz it up too much. I just wanted the flower to be the focal point. I adhered a couple of leaves directly to the card base and then popped up the flower and one of the leaves. And I did come in and add a centre too. I used the peachy keen and the lemonade stand to create the centre of the flower, but I was considering maybe using some glitter cardstock. I thought that would have looked nice as well. So we're on to the second technique now, and this time I'm going to be doing some stamping, but I'm taking it up a notch. Last time when I created this, I actually stamped in some obsidian black ink, but this time I thought I'd try some white heat embossing, and why not? And then rather than doing small flowers and making my own bouquet, I thought it would be fun to see how it goes, how it looks using a large flower. And this striking flower, I can't stop using it. It's just amazing. It makes me happy. And I'll tell you another thing here that made me really happy was adding the blue that's called Ride the Wave ink to the purple. I wasn't sure at first. I thought, well, what have I got to lose? Mix your colours, give it a go, and it just gave it the depth that flower needed. This time I decided to make a sympathy card, so I've got a sentiment from the Fragile Foliage stamp set. I did use the obsidian here again, but I wanted to come in and add some splatters to my background. And I forgot how vibrant this ink was. So I added way too much ink to my block, but that's okay. I will learn for next time. Well, not straight away, maybe next time, because I did come in and add the blue and the purple splatters and popped up my flower and the leaves on the front of the card. Now, I wasn't expecting this. I thought I was going to like the crafter flower version better, but in the end, I preferred the sympathy card.
Images coming from the bottom. This is a different look from the typical card with a focal image in the centre. Recreate this gorgeous floral look on your own cards with images raised from the bottom. Opt for colouring stencils or a simple black and white look if you don't want to do the watercolouring.
I will use the Painted Flower Carnations stamp set for the project. I will prep an A2 watercolour cardstock with anti-static powder and then place it in the stamp field. Stamp the image with embossing ink twice in a way that will cover the width of the panel. Then I will cover the panel with anti-gold embossing powder and heat set. I will color the flower with rouge and ruby red from the Winter Wonderland watercolor brush marker set. This is a very simple coloring method, and there are a couple of ways to add color to the image. First is to add both colors one after another by scribbling them directly onto the cardstock and then spreading them out with a wet paintbrush. I will start applying water to the plain area in some sections so that there is less pigment, and in other areas I will add water directly over the pigment so that it reacts to the water and spread. In this way, the entire flower will have varied concentration of pigment and not just one layer of color. I'm using the number 2 brush from the fine watercolor brush set, by the way. The second way is to apply the light color first, that is the rouge. Use a wet paintbrush to spread the pigment around, ensuring there is a variation on the petals, some dark portions and lighter edges. Then add pigment with the ruby red brush marker and spread the pigment with a wet paintbrush. This way will give you more control over where and how much red to add. So if you're not familiar with the watercolor brush markers or are hesitant to use them, you should try this. Once the flowers are done, I will add very little emerald pigment to the green bits, the leaves and the stems. I will then use a wet paintbrush again and spread it out to cover the entire area. Now you can apply the emerald pigment to areas where you want to show more detail. I also did the same. I chose some of the portions randomly, and I also applied the emerald color to the base of the stem and also to the bends of the leaves. I decided to add a light color wash of emerald to the background and diffuse it as I move towards the top of the panel. I will switch to the number 3 round watercolor brush by Altenew so it is easier to cover the area quickly. Once done, I will leave the panel to air dry. You can also use your heat tool to dry the panel. To finish, I will add fine black paint splatters and then some gold splatters from the metallic watercolor 14 pan set. I also stamped a sentiment with obsidian pigment ink and adhered the panel to a card base.
All of these cards are amazing go-to card templates that you can try again and again with your own special twist. What is your favourite card template you find yourself using all of the time? Hello there, did that video just spark your creativity? And do you want more project ideas and inspiration videos too? Well, if you do, please make sure that you subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, make sure that you do click that notification bell so you don't miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.